Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I want to go over why I still love the ZVE1 and use it on all my shoots. So if you guys seen any of my previous videos, I'm mostly a wedding photographer and videographer, and also a concert photographer and videographer. I mostly specialize in photography, but I've been dabbling in videography a little bit. But I only consider myself more of a pro in photos than videos. I just do this as a learning experience and because I love it. Videography has been very exciting for me. I've been getting a lot of different cameras, and I'm a gear nerd like most of you guys. And videography is just kind of new scope for me, so I'm very excited about the cameras and the way we use them. So the ZVE1 I picked up about a year ago, and I was surprised how good this camera was. As you guys may know, it uses the same sensor from the A7S III or the FX3. That's Sony's best sensor. They also put it in the FX6. So it's one of their best sensors unless you're going to the higher line, like the Venice, the Burano, which is out of most of our budgets unless we're like professional videographers shooting movies or things like that, documentaries. The ZVE1 was very enticing for me because I don't do video as my primary point of income. Photography is more of my niche. So I thought the ZVE1 would be an awesome camera just to get, see what the sensors are all about, experience the dual native ISO, and see how I like it. When this camera came out, the biggest item that people were focusing on is that it overheats. A lot of Sony's cameras overheats. So you have to make sure to go into the menu system and enable the high temperature, the high temperature setting. This way the camera won't turn off as soon. Once I actually shot a wedding and one of my cameras shut off. So I rented a second body for the wedding and I forgot to change that setting, and it was an A7 IV, and my second A7 IV body turned off on me. So make sure to turn that off. You'd be surprised how quickly these cameras turn off unless you enable the high temperature thing in the menu. But yeah, getting back to the ZVE1. So I have quite a few cameras now. I have the A7 IV, A7 III, and I use the red Komodo and the Blackmagic 6K full frame as my video cameras. But I still turn to the ZVE1 as my main camera for so many gigs. So when I shoot a wedding, I'm mostly the photographer, but if the couple doesn't have a videographer booked, I'm gonna deliver a highlight film as kind of a surprise to them. So I usually have my A7 IV and I have the ZVE1 as my second body. So I'm primarily shooting video of the A7 IV and I use the ZVE1 as my video camera. While I'm using the ZVE1, I'm using it because the A7 IV, when you shoot in 4K, there's a slight crop. So what I love about the ZVE1 is you don't get any crop while shooting 4K. And it also has 3-level stabilization. Obviously, it has in-body stabilization. Then it has 2 levels above that of stabilization. Those stabilizations will have a slight crop, and the third one has a pretty big crop. But in those situations where you don't want to use a gimbal, but you still need stabilized footage, this camera is a lifesaver. So like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm also a concert photographer and videographer. I mostly do it as a hobby. Sometimes bands will reach out to me to shoot photos and video at their concerts, but it's mostly a hobby. So I love bringing the ZVE1 to those events. I switch on the highest stabilization. I don't mind the crop in those instances because if I'm in a crowd and I'm trying to shoot like an action video of the band, I'm getting pushed around everywhere. I mostly do metal shows, rock shows, things like that. So, it's not just people standing around. So I think this camera is perfect for that. The crop will actually give me more of a reach with my lens and I can get amazing footage. This camera also has an amazing microphone built in. So when I shoot these live videos of bands, I don't use any external microphone or anything like that. I just use the microphone that's built into the camera. So make sure to turn down the input on the microphone. So when the first band plays, I kind of make sure my levels are set correctly so I'm not clipping or anything like that. After doing that, the microphone's perfect during the concert. The only instances I had issues if the band uses a lot of bass, like digital bass, maybe they have like bass samples. In those situations, I have issues with the audio, but I think most microphones would have the same issue unless you're using a microphone with like 32-bit float. So I think this camera is awesome for that. I'm gonna include some live videos of some weddings and some concert videography I shot with this camera, and you guys can be the judge. And I think you guys will be amazed how well this camera performs. And the second native ISO of 12,800, when it's a very dark venue or the band has the lights turned down, they don't have many lights because they like that darker look during a concert, this camera's perfect. Many people made the analogy that this camera basically can see in the dark. So the 12,800 footage cleans up very well. You can do some noise reduction in post, but honestly, the camera does the noise reduction in camera already, so you get awesome clean footage at 12,800. So I think the bucket that people are putting the ZVE1 in is just like an influencer camera, a content creator camera. You can vlog with it, you can walk around with it, that full frame sensor, you can just put a wide angle lens on it, you have this awesome microphone on it, and it's just like a vlogging camera. But I think you can use this camera for professional shoots. As you guys see on my camera right now, I have an XLR module on it. I have a handle. I also run a dummy battery sometimes if I'm doing an interview or something like that. And I'm using a V-mount with it. So you can rig this camera up to be almost as good as the FX3 in those instances. So don't think of this camera as just like an amateur content creator camera. You can use this for professional shoots. You can use it as your A cam, B cam. It's just amazing. It actually has better autofocus than the FX3 or the A7S3 because they added the focusing features from the new A7R5, I think. I think it's on the 5 now. They added that autofocus system from that camera into this camera. So the autofocusing system in this camera is better than the other cameras with this sensor. So you can use this on professional shoots. Like I mentioned, just use a V-mount so it runs all day. Put a dummy battery in. And when you're shooting interviews, if you don't want it to overheat, make sure the screen's opened up so it has a little bit more ventilation. And when you're using a dummy battery, I think this camera doesn't overheat as much with a dummy battery either. Because what I noticed, when this camera overheats, the battery is very hot. So you're taking that battery out of the camera and it kind of takes out a lot of the heat from there. So you can use this on professional gigs, run and gun. You can put it on a gimbal. This is an amazing camera. Don't think of it as just an amateur content creator, influencer camera. But yeah, another pro of this camera, it's very small. It's much smaller than the A7S3 or the FX3. But some people might think it's too small. So what you can do is put a cage on it. So I put a cage on my camera. This way I can mount a side handle, a top handle, or I can take all those things off and I have a small body. So during concerts, I usually take off the top handle. Like I mentioned, I just use the internal built-in mic and it works perfectly. Even with the side handle, sometimes I take it off, sometimes I put it on. It's whatever you want. So you can rig this camera up or down. And I think the cage, helps a lot with the grip. So without the cage, the grip on this camera is very small. While putting the cage on, it just kind of improves the grip, but keeps the camera still very small. So highly recommend the size of this camera. It's small, but you can rig it up. Get to some cons about this camera. So it only has an SD card slot and only one of them. So if you're going to be using this for a professional shoot, I would suggest you still have a second camera, A and B camera. So if anything happens with the footage on this SD card, you still have a second camera feed. Then maybe you can salvage the interview or whatever you're doing. So for professional gigs, I would suggest you get a camera with 2 card slots, or if not, make sure you have a second angle or footage with a second camera you're shooting. So like I mentioned, I shoot with this during weddings, but I don't charge a couple for the videos. I throw in a highlight video as an extra bonus. I'm mostly there just to capture the day with photos. I think for my instance, I'm not charging a couple for that video. So just delivering, a highlight video as a surprise. If I lose the footage, it wouldn't be good. I wouldn't be able to deliver that to the couple, but they're hiring me for photos, not video. But you can also just shoot with 2 cameras. So have an A and B, maybe have a second camera for speeches, and use this on a gimbal and just kind of walk around, or you can use the stabilization built in. So you can still salvage the highlight video, but I've never had any of my memory cards fail. I know people say, obviously, it might fail on you, it might not. You know, a lot of these SD cards are very robust and work very well. So just don't cheap out on cheap SD cards. Make sure you're running at least a V60 or V90. And if you want to actually get, you know, all the video footage in this, video features, like 120 frames a second or the highest bitrate, you need to use a V90 card. So just so you know, if you're using a V60 card, not all the bit rates will be available in this camera. But yeah, use a nice card, use an expensive card. Don't buy like no-name cards. I've been using Lexar cards in this camera and I've never had an issue. And when your cards are very old and you've kind of used them for, you know, several years and you're still shooting professional gigs with them, I would say retire those cards, just use it for your personal work and make sure you're getting new cards, for example, every year or two. Obviously, SD card only has so many read and write cycles on it, so you don't want to risk it at a wedding or a professional interview, documentary or anything like that. So invest in expensive cards and recycle them after a couple years. Another con of this camera, when I use it for, even for my YouTube videos and I mount a top screen on there so I can see myself, this is a mini HDMI, it's not a full-size HDMI. I know some people, you know, want a full-size HDMI, and including me. I feel like the mini HDMIs are very flimsy and they kind of just move around. And if you're running, you know, it on a gimbal or you're running around, you're shooting a documentary, you can damage the HDMI port in this. So if you're gonna go that route, I would say get one of the HDMI clamps just to hold the HDMI port in place, just to kind of minimize the risk of damaging the HDMI. But yeah, I wish there was a full-size HDMI in this, but obviously it's a smaller body, so I understand why they use the mini HDMI port. But yeah, I love this camera. I still use this camera as my A cam in a lot of instances. I shoot a lot of, you know, highlight videos, concert videos with this camera, even though I have a red Komodo and a Blackmagic 6K full frame. And it's because the autofocus on this camera is amazing. It's small, the file sizes are small. You know, you can shoot an S-Log3 and grade and post, and my other two cameras mostly shoot RAW. So I have bigger file sizes. The autofocus isn't as good or just non-existent depending on the camera. So I think this camera is just an A cam for me a lot of the times, and I'm using the Komodo or the Blackmagic as my B cams. If you're still looking at this camera, obviously it came out a couple years ago or a year ago. I think it came out in 2023 or so. It's an amazing camera. I feel like it lost some of its hype. People forgot about this camera. You can pick these up for under $2,000. So I think that's an amazing price for this camera. And the A7S III used still go for close to $3,000 or so, or over $3,000. And the FX3 is over $3,000. So if you want that same sensor, the extreme low light performance, amazing codecs, pick the ZVE1, you won't regret it. So yeah, thank you for checking out this video. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you guys shoot with a ZVE1 or what other Sony cameras or any other cameras you guys are using. And yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions. I'll get back to you guys. See ya.